Kyler Murray will not be a Cardinal, I think, by this time next year. Because I think what we saw earlier on Friday with the Cardinals releasing all-pro wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins, I think to me, that spells now the beginning of the end of Kyler Murray's time in Arizona. I think he will be traded this time next year. I think he's going into, in 2023, his final year as a Cardinal. Let me spell it out for you, and here's why. This one move of cutting a receiver, I think, spells the end of Kyler with the Cardinals. Okay, so you're going to go into 2023, obviously, without DeAndre Hopkins, a really damn good wide receiver, and Kyler Murray, let's just say, for argument's sake, is going to miss half the year, right? We don't really know exactly when he's going to return with that torn ACL that he suffered late last season, but let's just say conservatively, he is going to miss half the year. So you're going to go, if you're the Cardinals, into this season with no DeAndre Hopkins, your best receiver, and your best quarterback for at least half the year. And this Cardinals roster is terrible. It stinks. I think they're going to have the worst record in the league this year. Without a doubt in my mind. Jonathan Gannon, new head coach, a lot of questions about him. Defense is not very good. Offense does not have a lot of talent on it. Vegas is telling you with their odds, by the way, that they are going to get the number one pick next year. So I would say it's a pretty safe bet to assume the team picking first next April, it's going to be the Arizona Cardinals. But it's not just the fact that they will be picking first next year as to why they can move off of Kyler Murray. It's also the fact that they have a pretty good chance at picking second as well. Because don't forget, they have the Houston Texans first round pick next year. The Texans, when they traded up from number 12 to number 3 in order to go get Will Anderson Jr., gave Arizona next year's first round pick. And I know they have CJ Stroud and they have DeMeco Ryans, so you could look at the Texans and say, oh, things are turning around, things are looking up. That's still a team bereft of talent. They are not very good whatsoever. So I don't think, even though you would think your quarterback of the future and your head coach of the future, I don't see a lot of wins forecasted for the Texans in 2023. So you look at the Cardinals and how bad they are and are going to be this year with Colt McCoy as their quarterback for most of the year. You look at also having the Texans first round pick as well and how bad they're going to be. I think the Cardinals next year will be looking at having the first and second picks in the NFL draft. And you know what that means if you're Arizona? With pick number 1, you take Caleb Williams, quarterback out of USC, followed up by pick number 2, Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State, a wide receiver. You right there for your Arizona. Get your quarterback of the future, get your wide receiver of the future, and then boom, now you're on the track to success. Now all of a sudden you have a direction you can actually believe in. Right now the Cardinals do not have a direction. I guess really, I should take that back. They do. Downwards. They have a direction right towards the bottom of the league with how bad they're going to be. But that's the answer. And that's why I think Kyler Murray, his time is going to end. And that's why I think this DeAndre Hopkins just flat out release kind of shows you why Kyler Murray's time in Arizona, it's ticking. If you're sitting there with the number 1 overall pick next year, if you're the Cardinals, you can't pass on Caleb Williams. You can't do it. This guy is a generational talent. And I understand, I get it. That term is thrown around way more loosely than it should be. But for me, when I look at generational talents, when it comes to quarterbacks, I would put in that category John Elway, Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about generational talents coming out of college, going into the pros. Caleb Williams is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner on an offense that was extremely productive and extremely successful last year under Lincoln Riley. And even as a freshman, he had a lot of success coming in for Spencer Rattler and playing really well. Caleb Williams is the truth. So if you're the Cardinals, you can't pass on him. You got to take him number 1. And then when you have the Texans first round pick, which probably will be very close to yours, you take Marvin Harrison Jr., and now all of a sudden, you have your offensive core for the next decade. You got to move off of Kyler Murray. He's not showing you a lot in terms of being a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. And this year, I think, is going to be the perfect excuse for the Texans to, or I should say the Cardinals, say, Kyler, it's been a joy, but we're going to move on and go forward here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts at 855-212-4227. 855-212-4227. Can't call, tweet at Ryan_Hickey and the number 3. Does the DeAndre Hopkins release signal the beginning of the end in your mind of Kyler Murray in the desert? And here's another thing to remember. Because you could point it, if your biggest retort right now to me in saying that Kyler Murray, this is going to be his last year in Arizona is, well, Ryan, he just signed a massive extension. They're not going to trade him 2 years after signing a big-time deal. Here's what they will. The Cardinals have a history of giving out bad deals and then not being afraid to move on from them. Here's what I mean by that. Let's just go back to last year. Steve Keim, Cliff Kingsbury, both fired. Why is that relevant here? Because after 2021, after the Cardinals made the playoffs with Cliff Kingsbury for the first time and Kyler Murray, the head coach got an extension, the GM got an extension, and Kyler Murray got an extension. Right? All three going into the 2022 season received contract extensions. 2 to the 3 are 1 year later not standing. Not in the organization anymore. Fired. Michael Bidwell, the owner, is not afraid to give out big contracts, move off of him. I mean, he just extended Cliff Kingsbury 1 year, gave him a big-time raise, fired him the next. Did the same thing with Steve Keim, his GM. Gave him a big-time extension, and you could say he walked away because of health reasons. He was fired. So Michael Bidwell and the Cardinals have no problem moving off of guys they just draft in Josh Rosen in 2018, they just hire in Steve Wilkes, or they just gave big fat extensions to. So that money that they just gave Kyler Murray is not going to be a hindrance to keeping him and passing on Caleb Williams. They'll do it. They have a history of paying big bucks and moving off coaches, GMs, quarterbacks, no matter what, salary or what draft capital was tied to them. So Michael Bidwell is not going to look at the dead cap hit, which if they trade Kyler Murray next year is going to be $81 million. Very high, I get it. He's not, though, going to look at that and say, I don't know, guys, can't do that. He'll do it, and I think he will. And that's when you look at the release of DeAndre Hopkins. We're looking at now him no longer being a part of the Cardinals. 5-time Pro Bowl receiver, 3-time All-Pro. I think that spells the beginning of the end of Kyler Murray in Arizona. This team is going to stink this year. They're going to have the number 1 overall pick. And when you have the number 1 overall pick, you got to take Caleb Williams, your legitimate quarterback of the future. Not a guy in Kyler Murray who you don't trust and they don't think you can get to a Super Bowl with. Remember, when they gave Kyler that contract extension, they included a homework clause in there. They basically said, you signing this contract extension are also agreeing to, in writing, to study multiple hours outside of the facility a week. They did not trust Kyler Murray, unless they got it in writing, to do the proper work a quarterback needs to do to be prepared each and every week. That's a problem right there in and of itself. So that tells you, in that little clause in a contract, where the belief level is in Kyler Murray from the Cardinals. They don't trust him. They don't believe in him. I think, to me, that's going to also be easier to move off of this time next year when you're ready to really start a new wave of your future and bring in your legitimate franchise quarterback in Caleb Williams.